Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You're very welcome to this session, and thank you, Jim, for the introduction. As Jim mentioned, the seafood sector in Ireland is one that contributes over €1 billion to the economy, and exports last year grew by 10% and were valued at over €666 million. The sector has enjoyed growth in the last number of years, and that consecutive growth is something that we in BIM want to try and help to continue. And on that basis, we launched very recently our 3-year strategy for 2018 to 2020, which is entitled Enabling Sustainable Growth. And that is the focus of our organisation over the coming years. Our job, very simply, is to support and enable an increase in value creation of a sustainable Irish seafood sector across the supply chain from catch to consumer. And that's a very important statement. It is about growing the sector in a sustainable way right across all the sectors, all the elements of the sector. We have 5 priorities, and I want to just talk about those in the context of the discussion of our theme this morning on Brexit. We have heard before the coffee break the great complexity and the threats that are there, and in terms of access and quota share, and the species that are particularly vulnerable. But I think it's important that BIM, together with the SFPA, have been working with the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine in developing and analysing scenarios that feeds into a negotiation process that is underway, and by its very nature has to be one that is confidential, but one that we are working very hard to try and support that national effort so that we get the best outcome at an EU level. We're going to hear later this morning about the trade implications, and my colleague Richard Donnelly is going to talk about some of the challenges that presents, but also some potential opportunities that are alternatives to try and mitigate that threat, and that's something that will be discussed amongst the panel. Just looking at our priorities in order, the first priority that we have is around sustainability. And I think it's important that regardless of the context of Brexit, there is a growing challenge for the sector to operate and to demonstrate how it works in a sustainable way, and this is a driving demand, and therefore even though there are more perhaps immediate threats, we do have to look at this as a long-term issue, and it's something that is an important enabler for us in developing markets overseas. BIM last year published its Environmental Sustainability Atlas, and that catalogues the various initiatives that we are involved in to support and work with the industry to achieve that. Here in Galway, for example, we are working with the implementation of the landing obligation, and that, in simple terms, is working with the sector to identify new technologies so that they can land in a sustainable way the targeted species and not have bycatch or reduce that. That's an obligation that's coming in, and it's something that we're doing pioneering work here in Galway to assist that. And I suppose in the longer term and in the Brexit context, we also have to recognise that while we're hoping to achieve as much regulatory convergence as possible, should there be any divergence, the need to understand and develop responses to that will become increasingly important. In terms of skills, traditionally BIM has been involved through our national fishery colleges, both in Greencastle and Donegal and in Castletownbere, in training the industry with the skills that they need in terms of their technical understanding of what is required to go to sea in terms of safety, and attracting young people into the sector and helping them to develop their businesses. But of course, as we think about the challenges that are ahead of us, the requirements for skills development, and it was mentioned at the outset of our session this morning, will become greater. And we're pleased to have launched very recently our Propel Management Development Programme, where we're targeting people that are involved in catching, in aquaculture and in processing, so that they have the correct and appropriate educational and training background to meet the challenges. And as we will see later on, those challenges are going to become increasingly complex depending on how the negotiations transpire in terms of how companies will be able to deal with more complexity in terms of trading. In terms of innovation is at the heart of what we want to do in terms of responding to challenges. And I think we tend sometimes to think of innovation as in the lens of new product development. And I suppose what we're working on very much is to broaden people's thinking of that. And an example that my colleague Michael Keating is going to touch on later is how, for example, the introduction of frozen at sea prawns was able to transform our response in terms of quality. And you can see here how that has had an impact in providing a better product for market and yielding a better unit price as a way of responding to that market. Also, we'll be looking at new transport opportunities in terms of utilising increasing air freight capacity in terms of accessing other markets farther afield and diversifying our market base so that our dependence and some of the challenges that might happen in accessing markets closer to home can be perhaps mitigated. There is innovation happening all the time, and we have here an example of oysters being transported live to China that's going on stream at the moment and being packaged in China and ready for market there. In terms of competitiveness, we tend, I think, sometimes to think that the competitive response is only about trying to produce a lower cost product. And while that certainly is a very relevant thing that we are working with the sector on, we also recognise that, and again this is something that my colleague Michael Keating will touch on in his presentation, is that the alternative to lowering cost, which is very important, is also about thinking about how you increase the value of your output and the unit value of your output so that you can respond to challenges. And we have some excellent examples from that in terms of the response that the oyster industry has reacted to in terms of turmoil in the European market some years ago, developing business in China, and that sales have increased by 10-fold over the space of about 3 years, and that there has been a 70% increase in value. So these are examples, and again from the crab sector, we see where, again, accessing higher quality and having higher standards, implementing higher standards to access more premium markets is a valid and appropriate response in terms of accessing markets overseas. And finally, to look at leadership, and this is something that why we're here in Galway at this conference and celebrating Seafest over the coming days, is to work together with the department, with the other sister agencies, to position the Irish seafood sector and to demonstrate that the value and the contribution it makes to the economy, and how, notwithstanding some of the challenges that we heard about over the course of the debate already this morning, that there are ways that businesses can prepare and that businesses can respond to these challenges and continue on their growth path and realise the vision that we hope for the industry, that we will be able to lead the sector through our expertise and through our effective support so that we can access markets around the world to continue to grow and in the context of demand for high quality and sustainably produced seafood. And by that, by way of introduction, I'd like to hand back to Jim for the next speaker. Thank you very much.